The little Ukrainian-Belarusian border town of Chernobyl, which was a part of the Soviet Union at the time, was hit by a catastrophe on April 26, 1986, when a sequence of steam explosions led to a nuclear meltdown. Hundreds of thousands of people were affected by the cataclysmic event, and it had a significant influence on the ecosystem in the neighboring communities. On the other hand, something peculiar is taking place over 40 years later. The Chernobyl Exclusion Zone, CEZ, which encompasses the nuclear plant and encompasses an area of about 1,000 square miles, is gradually becoming one of the largest scientific studies undertaken anywhere in the world for the purpose of investigating the long-term consequences of ionizing radiation. Despite the fact that people may have left the region, some creatures continued to remain there. In 2016, a research reported that the eastern tree frogs, Hyla orientalis, in the CEZ, display different traits than their adjacent relatives. In 2023, another study identified significant genetic variations between Chernobyl canines and dogs living just 10 miles away in Chernobyl City. Both of these studies were conducted in the same year. Now, scientists Kara Love and Shane Campbell Stanton from Princeton University are investigating yet another peculiar mammalian trait of the CEZ, which is the unusually high number of wolves that live there. At the annual meeting of the Society of Integrative and Comparative Biology, which took place in January, the findings of the research that had been conducted for a decade were presented. Due to the fact that wolves are apex predators, sometimes known as the top of the food chain, doing research on them in the CEZ is a very intriguing endeavor. For the most part, this is a privileged position within an ecosystem. Yet, when that environment is flooded with radiation, these creatures are compelled to consume irradiated prey that consumed irradiated plants that developed out of irradiated soil. To put it simply, it is radiation with a downward trajectory. Love asserts that this is not the case, despite the fact that this would appear to imply that wolves would be severely affected in the CEZ. Earlier this month, she said to National Public Radio that the wolf populations in the Central European Zone, CEZ, are really 7 times more dense than the protected wildlife regions in Belarus, which is a neighboring country. Gray wolves offer a really interesting opportunity to understand the impacts of chronic, low-dose, multi-generational exposure to ionizing radiation, Campbell Stanton said in an interview with National Public Radio, NPR. As an evolutionary biologist, the very first question that came to my mind was whether or not this radiation was sufficient of a stressor to actually be a selective pressure, the author writes. In an attempt to get a better understanding of the population's reaction to the radiation that caused cancer at Chernobyl, the Princeton researchers put collars to these CEZ wolves in 2014. These collars had both a global positioning system, GPS, and radiation dosimeters. The researchers made the discovery throughout the course of time that the wolves were routinely exposed to radiation levels that were 6 times greater than the permissible limit for humans. The argument put out by Love and Campbell Stanton proposes that wolves are undergoing a kind of natural selection that is occurring at a fast pace, which is most likely brought about by the rapid changes that are occurring in their surrounding habitat. Within the CEZ, there were certain wolves that have genes that rendered them more resistant to cancer than other wolves. In spite of the fact that they continued to get cancer at the same rate, these hardy dogs simply did not experience as much of an effect, which enabled them to pass on those genes to subsequent generations. Therefore, in general, we discovered that the sections within Chernobyl that are developing at the quickest rate are located in and around genes that we are aware of playing a role in the immune response to cancer, or the immunological response to anti-tumor in animals, Campbell Stanton said in an interview with NPR. Despite the fact that the data demonstrates that the CEZ wolves have a definite genetic basis for their resistance to cancer, Campbell Stanton is quick to point out that these wolves are also free from other biological stressors, the most notable of which is the presence of people. In order to determine the potential implications of these findings for human health, the team is presently collaborating with cancer experts. For many years, Chernobyl has been portrayed as a catastrophic ecological catastrophe, which it most certainly was. However, over the course of the last 10 years, the Chernobyl Exclusion Zone, CEZ, has also seemed to be looking more and more like an exceptional scientific opportunity. Health of the nation, the country's wealth, was written on a sign that was proudly displayed on the top of the Pripyat City Hospital, #126. This sign served as a humorous reminder to the people who lived in the newly established Soviet model city. The main wing of the hospital is located on Druzhby Narodov Street, which is part of a huge medical complex known as EMK 126. It is situated in the micro-district of Pripyat. In addition to the 410 beds that were available at Pripyat City Hospital, there were also clinics and outpatient facilities that were linked to one another. The city had been ready for any emergency they could have imagined, complete with a dentistry clinic, maternity ward, infectious disease clinic, and a morgue. The term imagined is the key word here, despite the fact that none had anticipated the terrible events that occurred on April 26, 1986. Despite the fact that this is normally a bustling hospital, it became the location where 237 plant personnel, firemen, and troops were treated for acute radiation poisoning when reactor #4 went into meltdown on that fatal night. Many of these individuals did not survive their exposure to radiation. Within the first 3 months, there were a total of 28 deaths among firefighters and rescue professionals, as stated in a study published by the World Health Organization, WHO, in 2006. There was such a high level of radiation that the clothing of the victims had to be moved to the basement of the hospital, where they have remained till this day. After some time, casualties were sent to Moscow, which was the location of the only institution that was capable of treating radiation victims. Documents and medical equipment from the hospital were found scattered about in a disorderly manner, and the basement, which is the most radioactive place in the city, had to be abandoned within only a few days following the event due to the increasing radiation levels. Since the Destination Truth team from the Sci-Fi Channel identified many human-like entities moving around frame in video surveillance shot of the hospital during a paranormal investigation of Chernobyl, many people continue to believe that the location is haunted. Andrei Korsakov, a nuclear scientist at the University of Buffalo, had a horrifyingly terrifying experience while working at the Chernobyl power plant in 1997. He saw someone shouting for assistance while he was there, and he reported hearing them. The iconic Ground Zero of the Chernobyl accident was the location that he was visiting, and he said that he arrived there at around 7:30 in the morning and proceeded straight to the sarcophagus that was located in Reactor 4. During the time that he was collecting readings, he reported to the authorities that he could clearly hear someone faintly but urgently pleading for assistance in putting out a fire. As a result, he hurried back upstairs and informed those who had allowed him to enter what an individual had seen. On the other hand, they announced to him that he was the first person to access the location in the last 3 years. In addition to this, they reminded him that in order to access, he has to have a password, a handprint is required, and if someone had entered without their knowledge, it would have triggered an alert. People who lived in the region began to experience incredibly weird happenings before, to the tragedy that occurred at the beginning of April 1986. Now, if that isn't strange enough, before the disaster occurred, there were accounts of workers at the power plant sighting a massive black bird-like monster with a wingspan of 20 feet and enormous glaring red eyes. This creature would later be referred to as the Black Bird of Chernobyl. Those who saw this apparition would also describe experiencing a variety of other symptoms, including terrifying dreams and receiving threatening phone calls, and said that these symptoms became more severe right up until the morning of the tragedy that occurred on April 26, 1986. Many scholars believe that the events that occurred at Chernobyl were caused by the Mothman, which is a monster that is frighteningly similar to the one that was said to have tormented the town of Point Pleasant, West Virginia, immediately before to the breakdown of the Silver Bridge on December 15, 1967, which resulted in the deaths of 46 persons. In addition, they argue that historical evidence reveals that this entity looks to be a forerunner of death. This is due to the fact that animals similar to the Mothman have been recorded in other locations in the past, and the phenomenon has not been reported subsequently. There is no doubt that the amusement park in Pripyat serves as one of the most recognizable landmarks in the city. It had just been built up and was getting ready to host the May Day events that were going to take place in the city on May 1st. Pripyat, on the other hand, was devoid of inhabitants and abandoned by the time April came to a close due to the nuclear tragedy that occurred on the evening of April 26, 1986. There were amusement parks in many Russian cities that were known as Park of Culture and Rest, and some of these amusement parks are still operating in Russia, as well as in the new nations that were founded following the collapse of the Soviet Union. Pripyat Amusement Park had a Ferris wheel that was 26 meters in diameter, swing boats, a ride that was similar to a parachute, bumper cars, and a shooting game. On the morning of April 27th, shortly before the order to evacuate was delivered, the fairground was opened for a limited period of time after it was determined that a diversion was necessary. A decision that is unfathomable in light of the information that we now possess on the gravity of the catastrophe and the quantities of radiation that were already present in the region that morning. People were thrilled and went to the new park, despite the fact that it was not actually finished. The Ferris wheel was still hidden under the cladding, and the canopies for the parachute ride were not yet in place. The park is deserted and idly sitting there. Leaves are swirling over the fences, and the bumper cars are still in the parking lot where they were left. During the journey on the parachute, the seats are gradually deteriorating due to corrosion, and the Ferris wheel is fastened and deteriorating. Despite the fact that the supports are orange with rust and the paint is flaking and peeling, the yellow capsules retain some of their former brightness in some areas. There is a wide range of radiation levels throughout the park. The liquidators were responsible for washing radiation into the earth after the helicopters carrying radioactive materials utilized the grounds as a landing strip. It is quite safe to be in concreted places, but the risk is much higher in locations where moss has grown. Although several regions have the potential to release 25 USVH, it was discovered that a specific hotspot located on the bottom of a Ferris wheel capsule emits slightly less than 230 USVH. In the whole of Pripyat, these are some of the highest amounts of radiation that have ever been recorded. The park is featured in the video games Stalker, Shadow of Chernobyl, and Call of Duty, Modern Warfare, as well as in the film Chernobyl Diaries. Additionally, it serves as the basis for Atlantic Island Park in the film The Secret World. It is a location of normalcy and calamity that is a battleground for the senses, and it is a place that is both lonely and dismal. The most intriguing mysteries of the exclusion zone is the Red Forest in Chernobyl, Ukraine, which is sometimes spelled as Chernobyl. This forest is a magnet for both the brains of scientists and the hearts of visitors who are thrilled about the area. In point of fact, the region, which is also referred to as Rusty Forest or Rudy Lis in Ukrainian, is exceedingly hazardous. After the disaster, the area around the nuclear power facility at Chernobyl was exposed to hundreds of tons of radiation. Now, what precisely took place at that time? The 28th of April, 1986, became the day when one of the worst disasters in the history of humanity occurred. Radioactive pollution was discharged into the atmosphere and large environmental regions as a consequence of the explosion that occurred at the nuclear power station known as Chernobyl, not Chernobyl, which is also referred to as the Chernobyl tragedy. One of the parts of the pine forest that was located in the closest proximity to the facility was the first to be affected by the strike. In terms of radiation dose, it was given the most substantial amount. A great number of the trees there passed away in an instant. Their appearance changed to a rusty red as a result of this radiation footprint. The name of the woodland was given to it in this manner. After that, it was determined to take down pine trees that were polluted. Due to the fact that the trees there absorbed a significant quantity of radiation, they posed a significant threat to both the natural environment and the humans who lived there. It is possible that a fire will start in the forest at any time. This might result in the formation of yet another radioactive cloud. Sand was used to cover the specific ditches that were used to bury the trees that had been cut down. Plantings of new pine seedlings were made, and they continue to be there to this day. Following the evacuation of people from the surrounding regions, the Red Forest transformed into an unexpectedly rich environment for a variety of flora and wildlife, including species that are in risk of extinction. The forest continues to be one of the most polluted regions in the world, despite the fact that its biodiversity has usually expanded quite a little since 1986. Despite the fact that people and animals have various levels of resistance to radiation, scientists continue to investigate how plants and animals may thrive in the forest. It was said that the region was home to a variety of animals, including wolves, beavers, deer, wild boars, and wild horses, as well as a number of different types of birds, such as storks and eagles. The largest concentration of radiation, around 90%, is found in the soil of the forest, where it is absorbed by the plants and insects that live there. Fires in the forest, which have the potential to send radioactive material into the atmosphere, are still another threat that continues to exist in the modern universe. The Ukraine is continually doing measurements of the radiation levels in the region, testing the areas for radionuclides, holding training sessions for firefighters, and implementing wildfire control measures. In spite of the fact that Chernobyl is one of the most well-known tourist destinations, it is legally forbidden for anyone who are not knowledgeable about the subject to enter the Red Forest due to the risk of losing their lives. The good news is that as a result of the lesser influence that humans have had on the forest, it has been transformed into an unintentional nature park, which is one of the most remarkable locations on the whole Earth. In 1986, the Chernobyl tragedy left behind a frightening legacy by establishing a zone of exclusion in which only a small number of types of life were able to flourish. Scientists have found astonishing fungus that not only live but also absorb radiation, and they have found them among the radioactive ruins. The purpose of this article is to investigate the distinctive characteristics of these fungi, namely Cladosporium sphaerospermum and Cryptococcus neoformans, as well as the possible uses of these fungi in the fields of environmental research and space exploration. Radiosynthesis is the process by which organisms have evolved to utilize ionizing radiation as a source of energy. Radiotrophic fungi are species that have adapted to employ this process. The first time that this phenomena was noticed was at Chernobyl, when researchers discovered Cladosporium sphaerospermum flourishing in the remnants of the reactor. Using a process that is analogous to how plants make use of sunlight in the process of photosynthesis, this dark-colored fungus has a remarkable capacity to transform gamma radiation into chemical energy. An essential component of this process is the existence of melanin, which is a pigment that is prevalent in human skin. Melanin not only shields these fungi from the harmful effects of UV light, but it also enables them to reap the benefits of radiation for their own development. According to the findings of laboratory research, Cladosporium sphaerospermum was able to efficiently feed on radiation since it exhibited increased biomass when it was subjected to radiation levels that were substantially higher than the normally occurring levels. The ways in which these fungus manage to survive are quite amazing. According to the findings of research, they have a behavior that is referred to as radiotropism, which is characterized by their growth toward sources of radiation. Several different types of mushrooms have been found to exhibit this growth pattern in the vicinity of the Chernobyl site, which suggests that they may have evolved to adapt to the harsh environment in which they live. Recent research has shown that both Cryptococcus neoformans and Cryptococcus sphaerospermum are capable of thriving under radiation levels that are 500 times higher than the average background radiation. It is thought that the melanin found in these fungus helps to promote electron transfer activities, which in turn enhances their capacity to effectively metabolize energy derived from radiation. Because of their adaptability, they are not only able to live in a setting that is unfriendly to the majority of other kinds of life, but they are also able to thrive in that environment. In the field of bioremediation, which involves the use of living organisms for the purpose of cleaning up environmental toxins, the finding of these radiation-absorbing fungus brings up fascinating possibilities. It is possible to create biotechnological solutions for the management of radioactive waste by using the capability of C. sphaerospermum to transform radiation into energy. It is feasible that reductions in radiation levels and the promotion of environmental recovery might be achieved by the introduction of these fungi into polluted locations. In addition, the one-of-a-kind characteristics of these fungus may result in the development of novel applications in the field of space exploration. Protecting astronauts from the effects of cosmic radiation is becoming an increasingly important problem as the possibility of sending them to Mars and beyond increases. There is a possibility that the melanin-rich fungus that were discovered at Chernobyl might be used in the development of radiation-shielding materials for spacecraft, which would improve the safety of long-duration missions.